Welcome to this episode of Innovating Employment, a podcast by and for workforce development professionals, brought to you by the Ontario Centre for Workforce Innovation. This podcast series asks leaders from across the workforce development sector to share their ideas and solutions for meeting Ontario's workforce needs. I'm your host and producer, Noah Snyderman. On today's episode, we're joined by Jane Tuer, Executive Director of Project Read Literacy Network, to discuss the Bridges Out of Poverty framework. Here's our conversation with Jane Tuer. Hi, Jane. It's great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you, Noah.
So, Jane, to start, can you tell our listeners about the Project Read Literacy Network and your role in the organization?
Absolutely. We're one of 16 literacy networks in Ontario, and we provide information and referral, service planning and coordination and supports that go with that to literacy services in Waterloo and Wellington. We also do a public education, trying to get people to understand what literacy really is, because most of the time you just hear people say, oh yeah, that's a real problem. So that weather, and they move on to something new. So public education is a big part of what we do. We also, in Waterloo region, provide Ontario Works or OW educational assessments. So we're a centralized assessment, then we can refer people right into our agencies. Another service we also provide, which is different from the other literacy networks, is family literacy programming, which is unique to us. Also, as a network, we do research and development, including creating a number of different curriculums. And in this job, I'm the executive director, so it sounds really good, but you oversee all aspects of the daily work of the organization. And in nonprofits, an executive director, you start to become the jack of all trades. So I do things from HR to finances to project development and management to evaluation and further. And obviously, we, as a nonprofit, we also have a volunteer board of directors that we work with.
Excellent. So, Jane, can you tell us more specifically about the employment challenges that your organization is focusing on?
Yeah, in our region, there are a number of employers, especially manufacturers, that are struggling to find and then keep those entry-level employees. For example, Guelph, which is one of my regions, Guelph has the lowest employment rate in the country. The unemployment rate is ridiculously low. So, and Waterloo region isn't far behind, so there isn't that huge amount of people to choose from. So they need to look in different places now to find these folks. And what they're finding is they're trying to work with people that live in daily instability or poverty, moving into the jobs now. And so that means working with people that are on Ontario Work, so the Ontario Disability and Support Program, or ODSP as we like to short form it. And many of those people have been on the system for more than 3 years. So they have neither been in the workplace or they've been out of the workplace for so long, it's feeling like a new process to them again. And many have lived in generational poverty, which is a whole different aspect. And people are finding that there's a lot of quits or dismissals happening within the first 3 to 6 months in these jobs. And that's a real issue for cost effectiveness and for keeping these employers staying here.
Jane, would these quits and dismissals be normal, or is this something that you find to be unique?
Since the unemployment rates are dropping, this is a more unique situation because you have people that have been in, once again, generational or long-term instability, which we like to say more so than poverty, because living in poverty is an unstable environment. But a lot of people don't even realize in many ways that they're living in poverty, which is quite interesting too. So these folks are going to work. They try this job because they don't want to be in the situation they're in. They go to this job and there's a whole bunch of things that happen in life. We all know this. As people that are employed, you know that, well, good heavens, your dog gets sick and you have to take them to the vet and your dishwasher perhaps breaks down and the garage door doesn't work. But you go to your job, you have to solve this in a way that works for your workplace and for yourself. For these folks, it could be as simple as as much as they're super problem solvers in their home lives in many ways, when it comes to work and home life, they can't problem solve. They become overwhelmed because all of a sudden their babysitter isn't available. So what do? They don't try to find somebody else because they're panicked. They go, okay, stay at home. Or the transportation can just take them out of the realm of going into work every day. If they miss the bus, it's like, well, then I might as well just not go. It's not understanding how to move into the workplace appropriately, and the workplace then will either fire them or these folks quit on their own. People that also are in debt, which is once again a daily instability move, you would think would want to keep a job, and yet they're the ones that go into work and it becomes so overwhelming, the debt, that they just quit because they can't deal with everything at once. And that's what is unique to this situation now, is that we're trying to move people that have lived in daily instability into a stable workforce environment, and that's a difficulty.
Wow. Jane, how might we explain the existing disconnect between employers and employee expectations?
Well, it's interesting because employers run their businesses on what I would call middle class values. And working with Bridges Out of Poverty, which is a framework developed in the States, they look at poverty from a standpoint of class. And it's interesting because it's something that makes us feel very uncomfortable to talk about class system nowadays. But it's true. We work with different values. And people that are successful in business and middle class in school are all middle class folks because it's middle class values that it's based on. And so we have this reasonable expectation, we think, as employers, that that everybody understands the unwritten rules of work, like you have to be on time or even 15 minutes early to a job. You use appropriate communications at work. You have certain work ethics. And these are things that employers as soft skills are saying are missing for people because they feel it's a reasonable expectation because they were mostly raised in middle class. If you've been raised in daily instability, time that matters is the present. You're not thinking about the future. So you're not planning for what's coming down the road. So you don't plan about getting to work on time. You're planning about, do I have enough to eat for dinner right now? So everything is about the here and now, and middle class is about the future. And things like communications in people that live in daily instability, it's based on that casual, buddy format. And so miscommunications can happen in the workplace because that should be used in the workplace, a much more formal language. And work ethics are, once again, a middle-class reality. We learn them just inherently. They can be taught, though, but you have to teach people. And employers really need to focus on orientation and their expectations to employees, and not assume that everyone just understands those hidden rules that we all think are just there. This isn't the employer's fault. It's more that most of us just aren't aware of the differences between how our different economic classes function.
That's really interesting. How can we develop best practices with education, workforce development, and literacy to bring more job seekers into the workforce and to keep them there?
I think awareness. Awareness is one of the biggest things. Providing Bridges Out of Poverty approach to showing the differences between how economic classes think and what their hidden rules are is the most important step. Educators can provide that training between daily instability and workforce expectations. And I'm talking about youth and adults. This could be done at high school level and at the post-secondary certainly, but I'm thinking more about adult upgrading. Literacy educators know how to teach adults, and they know how to adapt or develop programming to meet the needs of learners and their employment goals. So workplaces need education on the various expectations of employees. And employers, due to the hidden rules of class, need to be prepared to offer some simple supports to help maintain entry-level employees. Investment in entry-level staff can save employers a lot of money due to quits and dismissals. And I did some math on this. So according to the Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo, Wellington, Dufferin, they did an Employer One survey in 2017. They do them every year, but this is just 2017. Manufacturing in those three regions alone had 879 quits and 400 dismissals. So 1,279 turnovers in jobs just based on those two things, which once I did the math, and I did it very conservatively, This cost those employers over $4 million in 2017. And that's just 107 manufacturers in our region. And I know it sounds crazy, but there's formulas to figuring this out. And if people realize that if they put just a fraction of that money up front, how much they could save in the long run. So it's worth their time and energy to do this. A lot of people think, oh, well, I can't afford to put all that money into people at the beginning. And it's like, you can't afford not to.
Right. So how does Project READ work with other organizations in your community?
Well, as a network, we're there to promote and support our programs and literacy in general. So we have to develop those relationships with other agencies that also work with the same populations that we do. So adults in every aspect, but we do deal with more so with people that are living in daily instability. So that means we work with the employment services programs. And we also provide to do this through employment and training committees in both Waterloo and Wellington. We're very lucky here is that we've all realized if we work together, we work better. So we also work on poverty task forces in both regions because those are always different people. There's the mental health aspects and all of the wraparound services that come with that, including legal supports and government. We also consult in a number of projects that include work with the universities and colleges here because we do certainly have 3 universities in our region and a large college as well. We also work on a number of early learning committees, including we have the Early Literacy Alliance of Waterloo Region and the Child and Youth Planning Table. For example, right now we've been supporting the Smart Waterloo application. We're one of the 5 finalists in the country to get that potentially done. And we share work with our provincial network colleagues on projects and business plans and training. We do that because we're not overly funded. We're not funded well at all. But if we don't work collectively, we won't be able to do this as well. So we've learned that, you don't hold on to your own little pot. You actually work together and say, can we work on this conjointly, because if we do, we're going to save a lot more money and be much more effective. And so efficiency and effectiveness are all a part of our work every day.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, Jane, tell us about the LBS sector in Ontario. How do LBS regional learning networks or umbrella organizations such as Project READ provide support?
I've mentioned the literacy service planning and annual reports we do. We also provide analysis of stats for improvement, as well as analyzing educational statistics. I will take the EQAO results and make future predictions for our programming needs so we can start to plan for the future. See, I'm using my middle class values there. Professional development opportunities, we provide those based on need of our organizations. We do information on local needs like Ontario Works, ODSP, labor market information, e-learning opportunities, and we invite a number of guests to the literacy planning table just to have people aware of what's happening. And so sometimes that might be Ontario Works, that sometimes might be ODSP. It might be one of the e-channel programs that are run by the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities. We also provide expertise and knowledge. I've been in the adult literacy field for almost 30 years. I started as a child prodigy, and that's my story. I have a great deal of knowledge and expertise and experience. So I help out people that way. I give a lot of support to the programs based on those kind of skills. We provide opportunities for agencies to promote their programs through us using social media and any other aspect that we can. And we support organizations in the best way to bring forward information to and from funders and represent the needs of those programs in a coordinated fashion. So, you don't have a whole bunch of different groups coming willy-nilly. We come as a group as a whole. And we also do research and development that supports their needs.
That's terrific. Jane, for listeners who don't know, can you please explain the Bridges Out of Poverty framework?
Absolutely. Bridges Out of Poverty is a strength-based approach to working with people living in poverty, either generational or situational. And generational means that your family has lived in poverty for 2 or more generations. Situational can happen in an economic downturn if somebody loses a decent paying job and can't get employed again. So, and that's situational poverty is a different aspect because you're usually coming from a working class or middle class knowledge and skills and abilities to a situation. So it explains how to avoid the fix-it approach to working with people in poverty. A lot of times that's the biggest problem out there, is that most programs we want to help. We're big helpers in social services, and so we think, well, we can fix them being in poverty. We can fix this situation. And it's not about that. It's about working with people in poverty and focus on building their resources at an individual, organizational, and community level. So just not looking at if you fix the person, the situation is solved, or if you fix the policy, the situation is solved. You have to look at the whole aspect and all around it. It looks at the hidden rules of class that everyone brings with them and how this can create those issues and opportunities. And just as I had mentioned before about time, it's a time aspect is one. Another hidden rule can be about how we use money and how we spend it. So there's lots of different hidden rules that we bring with us. Instead of poverty, we usually say it's clear to say daily instability, because that's really what it's all about. If you don't have a lot of the financials, which is just one resource, you can really feel unstable in your life. So if your organization or business works with employees or people from daily instability, only a deeper understanding of their challenges and strengths will help you partner and work with them to create joint opportunities for success.
And where has the Bridges Out of Poverty framework been successful?
The framework has been really successful in the United States, where it was first developed, and especially in lower income school districts, where it started to increase retention and success of the children and youth. It's also been used within many communities across the United States, and the program has grown to Getting Ahead. That's a program that they created where individuals living in daily instability become investigators or research into the reasons for poverty and examining what it's really like to live in that daily instability. And no surprise, they find out it's horrible, it sucks. But they're also developing their own plans to get ahead, and they call it getting ahead in a just getting by kind of world. From there, they also developed a Circles program. The Bridges folks at AHA Process developed this Circles program where the graduates from Getting Ahead, and other individuals too, meet on a regular basis to develop supports, and more importantly, those bridging supports that help to move them out of poverty. We have plenty of bonding supports in our life, but those bridging supports, so they bring in professionals that volunteer to these Circles groups to meet with these folks and talk about how they can help support them to move out of poverty. That programming, Getting Ahead in Circles, has been really successful in the Lambton-Sarnia area, and it was run out of public health and social assistance together. And in Wellington County, over in the Arthur area, the Wellington County Learning Center also runs a Circles program. I feel it works well in a rural area where you don't have those same opportunities to meet. It's a more expensive program to run, the Circles, and I'm not sure that it's always a sustainable thing to do, which is unfortunate, but I think that there's better ways to do it. The program we field tested was the Getting Ahead in the Workplace version. We Canadianized it, and because it was based on American research, it focuses on the same things as the regular Getting Ahead program, but also adds on that workplace and the different expectations that come from that. The folks that are in the Getting Ahead in the Workplace program also analyze more about the needs for finances that a job can afford them. It's a fairly new rendition of the program, and we found that it had a really good effect on people, and that was what we were trying to see if we could evaluate it clearly. So out of 15 people, 6 went on to employment, and 8 went on to further education or training. It was amazing watching the light bulbs coming on across the room, because I've been doing this, like I said, for almost 30 years, and I've never seen people take on to this where they went, that's exactly what it's like. This is exactly how I feel. How do I fix this? I think the best part was the fact that as an adult educator, we knew how to really make it work. And so that was a good thing coming from that aspect. And the situations experiences really did just match their lives. So I still talk to a number of them on a regular basis and try to meet with them as often as I can without the funding to support it. Once again, it's, thank goodness for social services and us wanting to support people. It's also, I think I'd like to highlight a little bit the Cascade Engineering in Grand Rapids, Michigan was the first success with trying to use something like this in the first place. They were looking at ways to support people that were coming from social services. They were running into a lot of layoffs, or not layoffs, but quits and fires because these folks weren't ready for work. And so the owner there was very interested in trying to find ways to help people stay in the job. And so he went to a Bridges Out of Poverty workshop on the concepts and went, I need to figure out a way to apply this in the workplace. And he started to do this. And he's ended up helping to support developing employment resource networks in the States, which is something everybody should look into online because it's quite an interesting process how employers have actually invested in these employment resource networks. They're responsible for them. So they're the investor and the customer because the employment resource networks helps to provide supports to help keep employees in the job. If there's a transportation issue, they solve it. If there's a child care issue, they solve it. If there is this debt overhanging on somebody's head, they talk to credit unions and try to build up a process where the money all of the debt can be compiled together into one loan from them. And these individuals then can have the payment taken out of their paycheck every pay, and also even develop extra money on the side so they start to develop a savings at the same time. It's just a touch of some of the things that these employment resource networks can do. And they've been quite successful, and I think that they're in 3 states in the United States, and I see how they could work really well here as well.
Jane, how is Project READ working to implement a Bridges Out of Poverty program in Kitchener-Waterloo?
Well, we're using the framework to do the Getting Ahead in the Workplace program. We've trained a number of nonprofits on Bridges Out of Poverty and the concepts that go there, and to help them make their workplaces more accessible and open to people who are living in daily instability. I've put it in our business plan this year that I will be training local literacy and employment service practitioners on how to run a Getting Ahead in the Workplace program. We've aligned it to the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework, which is the OALCF, because we love acronyms. So we can run that as part of our literacy and basic skills programming. However, there's a problem. It remains that it does cost money to run this program. There's books, transportation, honorarium for attendees, because we have to respect their time and participation, childcare, food, the normal little things that go with this. We had hoped there would be a phase 2 to this project. That was the plan when we first did this, but we don't know at this point if there will be. We have manufacturing employers ready to work with us as part of this. They want to hire and do this orientation process, and we have Ontario Works on board. We just don't have the funding. So we're trying to come up with ways to make that work. If you don't have the funding, you have to find another way around it. And so I'm hoping that if we can make it part of the literacy and basic skills and employment services programming, that they can run it themselves.
Jane, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. Before we let you go, can you please provide your top 3 takeaways for employers and service providers to make the workplace more supportive for employees living in poverty?
Well, I've said learn and understand those hidden rules. That's the hidden rules of class is one of the biggest things. It helps individuals living in daily instability to increase their resources. And if we define poverty as that extent to which an individual does without resources, this will make sense. There's a variety of resources. Financial always jumps to mind, right? That's the first thing everybody thinks of when you talk about poverty or instability. But there's also other ones like mental. Do they have the necessary literacy skills to move forward? Emotional skills, language and formal register. Do they actually know that communication skill? Do they have social capital and support systems? Do they have the physical ability to work? Do they have that spiritual background? I'm not talking about just religion. I'm talking about, do they have a sense of purpose? Do they have motivation and persistence? And there's still more. There's actually 11 resources that we talk about within the Bridges Out of Poverty framework. We asked people that they could build a network of supports to keep entry-level employees on the job, like that employment resource network idea. If they can come together and come up with transportation supports, debt support, child care options, awareness of the wraparound services that are available within the community. And then once again, as I said, if the businesses together could invest or develop an employment resource network here, I think you would see a big change.
Jane, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Innovating Employment. If you like the show, let us know on Twitter and Facebook. Links are in the description below. You can also subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This episode marks the end of Season 1. We'd like to thank all of our listeners for checking in with us every month. Stay tuned for updates on Season 2, and as always, thanks for listening.